Welcome to Echo No More, clear, credible, court-ready documentation in high-conflict parenting. No hype, no legal jargon, no drama. I'm Dr. James. If you're new here, I'm really glad you found this space. This podcast is for protective parents navigating high-conflict custody situations, especially when the other parent is manipulative, emotionally unsafe, or unpredictable. I'm not a lawyer, and this podcast isn't legal advice. What I am is a parent who has lived through this system, and someone whose attorneys over and over again told me the same thing. Your documentation is excellent. They told me it made their job easier. They told me it protected my credibility, and they told me it changed how my case was received. That's why I'm sharing this. Not to teach you how to fight, but how to document calmly, clearly, and in a way courts actually understand. This is parent to parent, calm, grounded, and focused on protecting your child without losing yourself. School is one of the most confusing areas for parents when it comes to documentation, because school feels official. It involves teachers, counselors, administrators, records, emails, evaluations. So naturally, many parents assume if it's coming from the school, it must carry weight in court. And sometimes it does, but not in the way most parents think. So today, we're going to slow this down because school information can be incredibly helpful in documentation when it's used correctly. And it can quietly undermine your credibility when it's used poorly. Let's start with a core shift. Courts do not see schools as judges of parenting. They see schools as third-party observers. That distinction matters more than anything. Schools are not there to take sides, analyze family dynamics, validate one parent over another, or determine what should happen legally. They are there to educate children, manage classroom environments, and support learning. That's their role. So, when school documentation is used in court, it's not treated as a conclusion. It's treated as observation from a structured environment. And once you understand that, everything becomes clearer. The most useful school-related documentation is not opinion. It's pattern, it's change, it's impact. So, what does that look like? Things like attendance records, tardiness patterns, behavioral reports, changes in academic performance, communication from teachers noting concerns, requests for support or intervention, observations about transitions. These are all valuable because they show consistency, deviation, and functioning over time. And importantly, they come from a third-party setting, which means they carry a different kind of weight. Now, let's talk about what doesn't help, because this is where many parents unintentionally weaken their documentation. A common pattern looks like this. Parents send long emails to teachers explaining the full family situation, the conflict, the history, their concerns about the other parent, hoping the school will understand, validate, or even reflect that back in writing. And I want to say this gently. Schools are not equipped to process that information, and courts do not expect them to. When parents overshare with schools, several things can happen. Educators become uncomfortable, communication becomes more guarded, records start to sound speculative, and neutrality can be compromised. And once neutrality shifts, the value of those records can decrease. So the most effective approach is simple here. Let school communication stay school-focused. That means keeping it centered on academic functioning, behavioral observations, attendance, transitions, support needs. For example, instead of explaining why something is happening, you communicate what the school needs to know to support your child. That creates cleaner records, clearer communication, and stronger documentation. Because now the school's role stays intact and their observations remain neutral. One of the most common mistakes parents make is trying to directly connect school issues to the other parent. For example, the school issues are happening because of the other parent's behavior. That may feel obvious, it may even feel undeniable, but in documentation, that's a conclusion. And courts are not looking for conclusions. They're looking for patterns. So instead of stating causation, you allow correlation to emerge. For example, noting behavioral changes following transitions, tracking attendance patterns across schedules, documenting increased school contact during certain periods. When these patterns are clear, the connection becomes visible, without you needing to say it. Let the timeline do the work. Here's a helpful way to think about it. School documentation answers one question: how is the child functioning in a structured environment? That's it. Not who is at fault, why something is happening, or what should happen legally. Just what is being observed consistently over time. When school records reflect changes in behavior, difficulty with transitions, academic decline or improvement, increased need for support, they become something powerful. Third-party corroboration. And the key word here is corroboration. They support your documentation, they don't replace it. There's a misconception that in order for schools to help, they need the full picture. They don't. They need what affects your child at school, what impacts their functioning, and what support might be needed. That's it. When documentation stays concise, neutral, and child-focused, it protects your child, it protects the school staff, and your documentation. And it produces records that are far more usable later. Another important boundary to understand is school staff are mandatory reporters. They are not investigators. That means if something rises to a certain level, they are required to report it. But they are not there to confirm intent, analyze family behavior, or build your case. When parents push schools to confirm something, it can create unnecessary escalation or documentation that feels forced, speculative, or outside the school's role. The better approach is state concerns clearly, allow the school to report within their scope, and let their documentation remain natural. One of the most effective ways school documentation supports your case is quietly. When school records align with your timeline, reflect similar patterns, and show consistent impact without emotional language, courts notice. Because it communicates something important. This is not just one parent's perception. This is observable across environments, and that kind of consistency carries weight. This is a fear many parents carry. What if the school doesn't see what I see? And the truth is, sometimes they won't. Children often behave differently at school than they do at home. They may mask, overcompensate, or compartmentalize. So school may see compliance, performance, or stability, while you see emotional fallout, dysregulation, or exhaustion. Both can be true, and courts understand this. School documentation is one piece of the picture, not the entire picture. You don't need school records to prove everything. You use them to add context when they are relevant. There's one more concept that matters deeply here: triangulation. This happens when a third party, like a school, is pulled into a conflict between two people. Courts are very sensitive to this. When parents use school communication to influence, validate opposition, it can read as triangulation. But when school documentation is used neutrally, factually, and within its scope, it reads as cooperation. And that difference is significant. If you take one thing from this episode, let it be this. School documentation works best when it is allowed to speak for itself, without interpretation, without pressure, without explanation layered on top of it. Because when it's clean, it's clear. And when it's clear, it's powerful. So as you move forward, remember, you don't need to turn schools into witnesses. You don't need to explain the full story to them. And you don't need them to validate your experience. You simply need to communicate clearly, observe patterns, and allow their records to reflect what they naturally see. That's how school issues fit into documentation. Before we close, I want to remind you of something important. You don't need to document everything, you don't need to be perfect, and you don't need to convince anyone with emotion. Calm documentation is power. If this episode helped you, you will find a full structured system in my guide, Clear, Credible, Court Ready. It's designed to support, not replace, your attorney. And if you want help turning everything you're documenting into something organized and usable, you can visit www.economocoaching.org to download my guide on how to create a clear, court-ready documentation binder. Take what helps, leave what doesn't, and most of all, take care of yourself. I'll see you next week.